Conversations Between A and I. I'm Isaac Hubbell, your host, and today is a very special day. I have waited a little bit over a year to get to record with Dr. Nora Reber, and she was a professor of mine while I was at UNCW, kind of like the one that we just did with Dr. Rogers. And part of this little project is I want to show the world who these amazing professors are that I get to spend time with and got to learn from for 2 years of my entire life. So without further ado, I would love to introduce all of you to Dr. Nora Reber.
Hi.
So Dr. Reber, for people who probably aren't going to know what you do, what do you do as an archaeologist for the University of North Carolina, Wilmington? Because it's really cool.
Okay, so I kind of wear many hats here in that I'm a standard field archaeologist. I run our archaeological field school in southern Brunswick County where we teach people how to dig. And then I'm also a chemical archaeologist, meaning I do full chemistry, like a gas chromatograph-mass spectrometry of organic pottery residues to determine what people were cooking and processing in their pottery.
Okay, so that was, okay, I love that. What is, incorrect my what is it?
Gas chromatography?
Gas chromatography. So what exactly does that do, and why does it benefit everything that you find on the ground? Because these are artifacts you're working with, right?
Yeah, so this really only works with pottery residues.
Okay.
So what happens is you know how like with a cast iron frying pan, it gets seasoned through time?
Yeah.
So that's what happens with an unglazed pot when people are using it in the past.
Okay.
And the things they make in that pot or what they use it in will kind of absorb within there through time. Right. And then we destroy the pot, I'm afraid. We grind it up. We lose it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we extract it with kind of a weak acid. It's like a mixture of a solvent and a weak acid, and that like sucks all those molecules right out of the pottery.
Okay.
And then we concentrate it down, and that's where we do that gas chromatography-mass spectrometry part.
Okay, so how does the machine work then? And correct me if I'm wrong, you're grinding them into like a full-blown powder, right? Okay. Yep. And what the machine is doing is it's going to tell us what is like the whole composition of it, or are you able to like sample out what the pottery maybe is made out of and then focus in on certain chemicals that we would find from food or something like that?
Well, pretty much we kind of get rid of all the pottery part of it. So if we wanted to know what the pottery was made out of, that's a different technique.
All right.
What we want is like the pure fat and other compounds that were in the food or whatever was made in the pot, because that doesn't have to be food. It could be medicine, or it could be dye, or it could be lots of other things.
Okay, well, so what have you found? What are we finding?
Usually food. Yeah. After all that, usually it's like a mixture of foods. So it'll be stew. We might have, for example, fried fish. We get that a lot in this area.
Okay.
We can detect corn if I'm working with my colleagues down there at the Center for Marine Science.
Yeah. So
pretty much food.
Okay, so what do we learn though, like about our culture then? So what time frame are we also talking about here? Is this full blown is it all Americana? Is it all just from since Revolution period or pre-Revolution, or are we up through the like pre-antebellum, antebellum period? Like, so what are we looking at here?
Well, the pottery has to be unglazed. Is the first thing.
Okay.
Glazed pottery, all that glazing just prevents the chemicals and everything from getting in the pot.
Okay.
So that means that as long as it's unglazed pottery, we can do it. But that also means people kind of stopped using unglazed pottery.
Okay.
It kind of depends when and where you are, but usually not much later than like 1820.
Oh, that really?
And then it goes earlier usually. So I've done a lot of work with maybe 1,000 years ago around this country in the Caribbean. And I worked with my colleague Ahana Ghosh in India for some Indus Valley sites, and that's about 2200 to 1900 BCE, or what, about 4,000 years ago?
4,000 years.
Yeah,
that's
wow.
Like that. Okay, and that would be Middle Bronze Age?
Pretty much.
Okay. Okay. So the analysis isn't just localized here to the greater Wilmington area and like Brunswick County. You're dealing with stuff that's, I don't know, how far is India? Pakistan?
A long way away.
No, okay, so is this stuff coming out of, like, what sites are we talking over, like, Indus Valley-wise? Is it Pakistan or northern India?
Mostly India.
Okay.
But I think we've primarily done artifacts from, Surkatata, from Ropar. Those are the two main sites. I'm trying to think of some of the others. She's had about 5 or 6 sites.
Okay.
Those were the big ones that I remember at the moment.
Wow. Okay. So What did you find from those sites? Maybe showing, because you were saying it's mostly food. So like, what are they eating over there, like in the Indus Valley?
Well, what we were really interested in was dairy, which you can also get at because we knew they were processing dairy and milk products, which we can get at.
Really?
Yeah. But we didn't find as much dairy as we expected. We found a little bit of dairy and a little bit of what's probably millet.
Oh.
Could have been dairy from an animal eating millet is another possibility.
Okay.
But me not so much, but Ahana found some really interesting patterns in terms of how they were using cattle and dairy.
Really? Okay.
So she's finding some sites where it looks like they're raising the cattle, like they're cow sites.
Oh.
And then other sites nearby where they're maybe processing more of the dairy.
Okay.
And the cow sites, maybe more dairy. And the sites where they're eating the meat or they're not raising the cow, maybe less dairy.
Right.
So it looks pretty complicated in terms of how they're moving their food around.
Okay, so, and I know with like the Indus Valley, we don't have any writing from them. We don't have anything to go off of, at least from there. But if we're going based off of the dairy products and such, are we finding any combinations between two different types of foods? Maybe the millet mixed with dairy products, or, what are they trying to make? What foods are we talking about here, like sustenance-wise?
Probably some sort of like stew food mixture kind of thing. It's really hard to tell whether people are using the same pot to make like everything mixed together in a stew or whether they're using it sequentially to make different ingredients, if you know what I mean.
Okay. So yeah, and then there's also like storing purposes, which I'm sure you also find a lot of stuff. Now, when it goes, we're not dealing with anything glazed in Bronze Age pottery, right?
No, that's all unglazed.
Okay. So, wow, that's so cool. So what got you into doing this? When I never got to ask you this as a student, but when you were a kid, what got you, something hit you, history or archaeology itself, like what got you from being little kid Dr. Reber to now being running this whole lab and doing spectrometry work and understanding and actually discovering what our past is as people?
Well, it actually wasn't as long a distance as you might have thought.
Okay.
So I was kind of always interested in archaeology from a fairly young age. Like it was sort of one of those things when I was like in junior high, I was interested in, and I always thought it was neat.
Yeah.
So in high school, when I was too old for church camp, but my parents wanted me out of the house.
Right.
They sent me to an archaeological field school for a season.
Really cool. That's awesome.
And I was lucky because my parents were college professors, and so they knew the archaeology professors.
Wow.
And so they sent me on with Phil and Sarah Nicias.
Okay. Wow.
Who were doing the Indiana University of Pennsylvania Field School at the time.
Holy smokes.
So the summer I turned 17, I was on a college field school being the only high school student.
Wow.
And I really liked it.
Yeah.
It was fun.
So what were you guys working with? What do you remember from that experience?
We were digging the Ripley site, which was pretty close to Erie, Pennsylvania, right on the border between Pennsylvania and New York, right up there on Lake Erie, kind of, where Buffalo is. And Ripley is right on about a 50-foot bluff above the lake.
Okay.
And it was an interesting kind of town cemetery that had been excavated several times in the past. And we were focusing more on the town aspect, which is mostly what we found. But the season after, I went up to volunteer, and some human remains actually had started popping out.
Wow.
So it was an interesting site. This time, I mostly remember, the black flies, pretty much.
Okay, yeah, getting annoying.
It was a bad site for black flies.
Okay, so 17, we're on this site and we're learning these processes. Now, okay, so I like to think of it because I have too much energy. I'd be impatient wanting to figure out what are we doing next with what we're finding. But what did you learn? What advantage do you feel like that gave you when you were like, okay, I'm going to go and take this seriously and get my undergrad in archaeology, right? Mm-hmm. And then you went to Harvard to do anthropology.
As a graduate student.
As the graduate student. Okay, so 17 to your mid-20s. Give us that story.
Well, since I knew I kind of wanted to do archaeology, when I looked for undergraduate schools, I was focusing on schools that were good in archaeology specifically. And as you probably know, in this country, archaeology is part of anthropology.
Right.
Yeah, so I looked at a few schools, and I also wanted something pretty small, not huge. And so I wound up at a school called Beloit College in Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is known in archaeology for its sort of unusually large output of archaeologists.
Okay.
The site itself is located on an effigy mound site, and it's got a surprisingly good museum for a very small school.
Wow.
And a long tradition of training archaeologists.
Okay.
So I went there specifically for archaeology, which was and is kind of a big strength for it.
Yeah.
And then the chemistry I picked up sort of by accident because I took a chemistry class.
Okay. So that's when you kind of figured out you wanted to do that, the chemical analysis stuff. Okay. So it was now, was that at Harvard, that like where you started really getting to push that, or did you get to do a lot of it with undergrad?
It was I started out in undergraduate.
Okay.
So I took an introduction to chemistry class with a really activist professor who tended to poach out the students he thought were promising.
Right on.
And so he asked me my freshman year whether I might want to take a 400-level seminar on the topic of gas chromatography-mass spectrometry. And I said that sounded amazing.
There we go.
Once I figured out what it was.
Right.
And so that meant, after that, I'd taken a 400 seminar and it wasn't so bad. So I kind of got sucked into chemistry along with my good pal Ann Miller, who we sort of traveled alongside each other for a long time.
Okay.
So that meant I was a double major as an undergraduate, and as my, don't remember if it was a senior thesis or an honors thesis, I was really interested in this pottery residue business.
Yeah.
I wanted to apply this gas chromatography mass spectrometry technology, which I'd learned freshman year and sort of been playing with. And this is really the best way to apply the technique to the archaeology.
Okay.
So I sort of started trying doing this my senior year with really bad results, like remarkably poor.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. So how did we improve?
Well, at that point, it was pretty clear to me I needed some sort of an apprenticeship, and here kind of fate came in. So the chemistry department, which was very activist, as I mentioned, required that all their seniors apply for various grants in their senior year.
Oh, wow.
It was just like part of what you did for your senior seminar.
Yeah.
So I applied for a NSF graduate research scholarship going for pottery residues, because it kind of made sense.
Yeah.
It was what my honors thesis was on.
Right.
But at that time, I didn't really expect to make a career in it. It was just a good topic for the grant,
Yeah.
which I had to do for my senior seminar.
Wow.
Well, and then I got the grant.
Okay. So you did get the grant.
Yeah,
Right.
which was 3 years free ride at any graduate school that would accept me. So that was good, right?
Right. That's excellent. Oh,
Yeah.
that's pretty wonderful. That's.
But then I
excellent.
was stuck because I'd written the whole grant on pottery residues.
Right.
So that's when I decided I would do pottery residues for my dissertation. Like exactly then.
Wow. And then, so did you know though at the same time that you were going to go to Harvard?
No, at that point, I had the grant in hand, and having determined that I really had to get the money, I kind of had to do the pottery residues. I started looking around me for graduate schools that would have that kind of chemistry-focused program.
Okay. And the equipment too,
And the
right?
equipment,
Okay, yeah.
So I started writing around. I kind of wrote to most of the people who'd written papers I liked and heard back from them. Wound up applying to several schools that they recommended or that they themselves taught at.
Okay.
And one of the people I was in contact with, Jim Burton, up at University Wisconsin-Madison, had kind of said that although Harvard didn't do pottery residues, they had the best archaeological chemistry program, and that he kind of recommended that I apply there.
Wow.
And some of my other contacts had told me, that they would accept me, but if Harvard accepted me, that I probably ought to go there, they said.
Right.
So I applied to Harvard.
Yeah.
And they have sort of a funny application, at least at the time, it was ages ago. They had sort of a funny application system, and that the professor himself or herself had to accept you, kind of. And they kind of had I suppose, a trading system in place, because they couldn't accept one student per professor every year. They just didn't have enough space.
Right.
So every professor would have like a turn at that time in the department, so they'd get one like once every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And if someone came by, they had to be willing to trade for you.
Wow. So they were treating it like sports.
Kind of, yeah. It was pretty wild. I doubt. I don't know if they do it that way anymore. Probably not.
Okay. So, but you got in.
But yeah, so my potential advisor was Nick van der Merwe. And he at one point contacted me and was like, hey, would you like to come up and see the lab? And at the time I was working CRM out of Western Pennsylvania, which is a really mobile kind of a job. You know, your boss will call you up and say, Reber, get to West Virginia by Monday. We'll meet you at the Comfort Inn in, Charleston at 9 a.m. Be there.
Okay.
And then you'd pack everything up, jump in the old car, and drive down to Charleston. So you met everyone at the Comfort Inn at 9 a.m.
Wow.
So I was really, at that time, pretty comfortable with just jumping in the car and driving long distances.
So, yeah, this made total sense.
Yeah, so when he said, you want to come up and visit, I was actually kind of between digs at the time because it had been a tough winter and there was a lot of snow. And so I just said, yeah, sure. Does next week work? I'm free.
Yeah.
And he thought, apparently, that showed, a real go-get-'em spirit and initiative. So, yeah, it kind of worked out. I didn't really think of it that way. I was just in a very mobile mode at that time, very car-based.
Go there. My options are open. Okay, cool. So you go up and you see the lab and you see everything they've got going on.
I meet Nick and all of his students, and, and we get on, and I think he does actually have a student, so he doesn't have to trade for me.
Oh.
And so he winds up accepting me as a student, even though he himself is not a residue man. He's a stable isotope person.
Okay.
But it turns out that worked out well, too, because that was just at the time when people were starting to apply isotopes to pottery residues.
Okay.
Which was what my dissertation was on. So from there, I did my classwork and made some contacts with the chemistry department who have the equipment.
Okay.
But the key point is that, Nick kind of knows people. So he contacts Dr. Carl Heron, who at that time was in Bradford in England.
Okay.
Which is where they've kind of invented the technique at Bradford and at Bristol.
Wow.
And asks Carl if, he would mind taking me for a summer so I can learn how to do it at the place where they really know what they're doing.
Right.
Because up to that point, I just had terrible times with my extractions. You'd work from the papers, and the papers just didn't include everything.
Okay.
It just didn't quite ever happen the way it should.
Right.
So Carl accepted me, and I wound up getting some money from the department, and I had my grant.
Right.
So I went over there to Bradford, and Carl and his students taught me how to do it. And from then on, I could do it. I had no problems.
And you could bring that back here,
Yeah.
stateside, and really be quite effective then. So how did that impact then your career going out of Harvard? Because you graduate and then, what happens next?
Well, I graduated and I actually worked with the people at Bristol as well because they had the stuff that would allow you to do compound-specific work.
Okay.
Which is the stable isotope bit that my advisor did
Right.
and applied it to my residues.
Okay.
So that's where my dissertation was. And from there, I was pretty much out on the job market, as you are,
Right.
applying for jobs.
Okay. So when you were doing all that, did you go back, back and forth to England, or did they just keep you for an entire semester and then?
They kept me for a semester.
Okay. Now afterwards, did you get to go back any times when you were?
Oh, I traveled back once, I think, while I was writing at this time. It's really early, right?
Yeah,
It's like 2000.
Yeah.
And there is no cloud, so the backups of the files were all on 2 1/4-inch floppies and
my
printouts.
Wow.
So I went back one time to give them all my printouts,
Yeah.
because they already had the floppies, but you
Right.
want 2 forms of backup. So yeah, and also to hang out with some of my friends and all that stuff.
Okay, cool. Wow. Okay, so that's something I'm actually really interested in. So how has digitization affected archaeology? Meaning, I'm sure there's a lot less, you can be more connected. You can instantly share results with people all the way over, in Bristol, England. So how have you watched that kind of grow since 2000?
Oh, it's been pretty amazing. I would say just space-wise, backing it up on a computer disk or a cloud has been pretty terrific.
Wow.
Because, it used to be you'd have shelves and shelves full of paper with all the printouts, and if you wanted to go back into your old results, which sometimes you do, you'd be hauling through notebooks from 15 years ago, and it would be messy, and the storage was tricky.
Paper falls apart.
Yeah, and you always had to sort of hole punch it and stick it in order, so there was sort of the arts and crafts aspect of it, if you will.
Okay.
So these days we back up all the files on a cloud drive, and I keep it on jump drives, and I usually keep it on my personal laptop, so in 2 or 3 separate places.
Right.
And
Backup for backup.
Yeah, and you have to make sure the formats are hopefully interchangeable and readable by the modern programs.
Right.
That's another thing.
Right.
But it makes it much easier to store everything, to look at it again when you want to look back, and also to send it to your colleagues around the world.
Okay. So when it comes to that, though, so you were on a dig at 17 years old, right? Okay. When you got to that point when things were, because that would have been like what, like 2012 is when cloud stuff got really big?
Maybe about that. I was looking up here on my paper files, and I think the last ones are about 2012.
That's so wild. Okay. So how do you think, like, did you at all, when you were 17, because I always ask, like, people in technology who have been in it for a long time, and did you expect technology to ever get to the point where it got?
No, definitely not. Particularly some of the processing things. So, for example, these days I can use a processing program that's free from the, one of the National Institute of Standards and Technology that will, with a little bit of input from me, identify the easy compounds in a residue, and then I can focus on the hard ones.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty amazing.
That
I
is
wouldn't
pretty
have
amazing.
guessed that even in graduate school.
Right. Yeah, and that's right, because that's what you were just saying right at the end of grad school, was looking at around the year 2000. That's so insane. Okay, so, all right, so we know how you got to be an anthropologist and an archaeologist and working with these chemicals. What do you think, though, out of all the things you have analyzed, what's your favorite? Like, what's been the most unique thing you found?
Well, like artifact-wise or pottery residue-wise?
Why not both? Yeah. We can start with the residue-wise, because I think that'd be pretty neat going along with just your field. But of course, artifact-wise.
I think it might be the tree resin thing.
Okay.
So tree resins are really pretty obvious in pottery residues. They show up very distinctively, and the chemical compounds last really well in the residues, which can't be said for many compounds out there.
Okay.
So they're pretty easy to find and pretty easy to identify. And so one of the things I didn't expect when I was starting out would just firstly be the sheer amount of the conifer resins. So one of my earliest papers was like, oh my gosh, there's conifer resins in pottery from New York State. And I was really surprised.
Wow.
And 10 years later, my paper would have been completely different because there's pine resins in like everything, practically.
Right.
But then when I started working in other parts of, the Caribbean and kind of around, we started seeing some really interesting patterns in terms of conifer residues in some of the Caribbean islands.
Okay.
So there are conifer resins in a lot of Cuban residues and in Puerto Rican residues. And yet in Puerto Rico, there are no obvious pine trees.
Right. Yeah.
They had to have been trading.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
Yes. So, and that never would have occurred to me. I sent my report to my excavators, and Lee Newsom, who was one of the excavators and who's just an excellent paleoethnobotanist, emailed me back and was like, Nora, there are no conifer trees with this kind of resin in Puerto Rico. And I was like, well,
Right.
I'm sorry, but it's sort of what I found there, and it was pretty clear.
Right.
So then we started realizing, they must have been somehow trading them in one form or another, whether in wood or maybe resin in jars or something.
When are we talking? What time period are we talking about here?
Oh, that site was, I think, I'm trying to think of that exact one. That was pretty recent, so like around, I think, 1200 CE, something like that.
Still, though, when you think
Might have been a little later, but yeah, it was pre-contact for sure.
Wow.
And pre-contact in that area is like 1500.
Right. Yeah. 1492. Columbus did what he did. But in a sense, though, that means that at around 1200 CE, we know that there was, it's what, like 90 miles between Florida and Cuba?
Yeah, something like that.
And then even further, for Puerto Rico. So, wow, that's extensive trading.
Yeah, and it seems to have gone even further. So, for example, I'm pretty sure I remember reading that at one of the sites in Puerto Rico, they had guinea pig bones. And, of course, guinea pigs are domesticated in Peru or the Andes.
Right.
So those have to have got somehow traded into Mesoamerica and then traded over into the Caribbean, and yet no one's ever found any in Florida, so that's kind of curious.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's not really my area, but there's some wild stuff going on there.
Right. Wow. Especially like 1200 CE. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's our favorite residue that we found. Now, what about artifact? That's the juicy one. That's the fun one.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a little fragment of what we think was a clay figurine from the site of Cahokia.
You've been
Near
to
modern
You went to Cahokia?
Oh yeah, that was the other half of my dissertation.
You didn't tell me that, even when we were in school.
Well, I mean, you were taking classes on Eurasia, so it didn't come up.
But in class, didn't we talk about, one of the kids in the class talked about like that area. Okay, go ahead. Keep
Yeah,
going.
I don't cover Cahokia and collapse because I don't think it collapsed.
Okay, all right.
So
What do
that's
you?
why it's not in the class.
Okay, can we talk about that a little bit? So what is your opinions on that, and then the artifact?
Yeah. So, I mean, for anyone who doesn't really know, Cahokia is this huge for North America site near modern St. Louis with probably 15,000 people at it near its peak.
Okay.
Although people can fight over populations
Right.
pretty, it's hard to know how many people were there at one time
Right.
in the past. But, it was really big and it was really complicated, and there were clearly a lot of people. It started around probably 1050 CE in its urban phase. And then by 1350, 1375, it seems to have been abandoned. And the great Cahokian polity or paramount chiefdom or whatever it was seems to have just drifted away into smaller chiefdoms. And the place where Cahokia was located, in that super rich floodplain, right by St. Louis,
Right.
it pretty much got abandoned. So no one was living there, which is weird.
Are there any indications? Because that's post mini ice age, right?
Yeah, there's certainly been a discussion that the end of the urban stage at Cahokia kind of corresponds with, the beginning of the Little Ice Age, which is at 1350, 1400. Say 1350 in Greenland, and then probably 1400 by this time it's affecting rainfall patterns around the world.
Right.
So it does kind of match up with the beginning of the Little Ice Age. Could be that. Could have been a lot of other things. Could have been politically unstable from the beginning and just shattered into pieces.
Okay.
Could have been they ran out of firewood. It's a lot of people for firewood.
Right.
Some people have argued for epidemic disease, but I think myself maybe not. And there does seem to be a big increase in warfare and kind of intramural violence towards the end there.
Okay.
In terms of the construction of palisades around the Great Plaza at Cahokia, which isn't the whole city, but it's like the central precinct, if you will.
Right. So, wow, that's wild. Okay, so this artifact that you're talking about here, though, what did you learn from it that when you're applying it towards Cahokia?
Well, just that there's sort of really interesting artifacts and human figurines at Cahokia, which, wasn't earth-shattering. We kind of knew that. There are a lot of famous human figurines from Cahokia.
Right.
It's just really exciting to have found a piece of one, with my fellow students at that time, even though it was a small piece, but still. Yeah.
That's really cool. So do you know where that piece is now, like what museum it's at or what lab it might be?
Well, the field school I was working for as an assistant at that time was out of Northwestern.
Okay.
So it would either be at Northwestern or it would have gone to the Illinois State Historic Society, one of the two.
Okay. Well, wow. Okay. I didn't know that you went onto the Cahokia site. That's really cool. Okay. So speaking of like North American sites, then I do want to jump over to the Topper site. So what's your opinion on that? Because they're talking. I believe the evidence is that they've found pre-Clovis layers underneath what they already had been looking in. So can you kind of fill us in on some of those details by chance?
Well, I'm not great at the really early peopling Clovis, pre-Clovis periods, but it is pretty well known that Topper has a definite, Paleo-Indian levels. So there's clearly Clovis levels at the site. Of course, where things get controversial is the pre-Clovis levels.
Right.
And never having seen the site myself, I can't really say for sure what's under there, but it is increasingly clear with recent research that there was a pre-Clovis in the Americas. Like, that's very definite.
Right.
Monteverde down there in Chile is pretty clearly 12,500 or early enough that people had to have got there before Clovis in order to get all the way down there to Chile.
Right.
Plus, there are a variety of other sites around the Americas, particularly North America, that have Clovis and then pre-Clovis underneath them. So that Buttermilk Creek complex you got in Texas, that's pretty definitive. Page Ladson in Florida, that's pretty definitively pre-Clovis, and that's in Florida.
Right.
So and of course, people argue vigorously and strenuously about Meadowcroft Rock Shelter.
Okay.
But it's now
I haven't heard of
looking.
that one.
Oh, really? It's in
No.
western Pennsylvania.
I didn't know. Okay.
It's another possible pre-Clovis site. It's like right on the border, kind of Pennsylvania and Ohio.
Okay.
And for a long time, there was a great argument about the radiocarbon dates.
Right.
So the dates did come out pre-Clovis, and the stone tool complex looked pre-Clovis. But being in western Pennsylvania, there were nearby coal seams, which of course could affect the radiocarbon dates.
Right.
So there was a very great argument for years, I think in the 1980s, whether the dates were accurate or whether they were affected by the nearby coal, which would have pushed them earlier.
Okay.
But as the earlier dates come out from other sites, Page Ladson, Buttermilk Creek, and of course those Lake Otero footprints that you see in White Sands, New Mexico.
Yeah, okay. So
those are probably, I mean, if you're very careful, they're certainly 18,000. And if you don't think that there's a freshwater reservoir effect, it goes back to 22 or 23,000.
wow. So, okay. Well, the Ice Age, what is that? Ice Age, the big one, happened, what was that? That started, when did the Ice Age actually start? That's 2 million years ago? Something like that?
It was more recent than that, but I'm not.
Well, I know Erectus was around during, like Homo erectus was around during.
Yeah, maybe it was. Yeah, but in terms of the end of it, I think I've heard people say that the ice-free corridor was closed, I think, up until, they say, 15,000, 14,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And that, like, deep freeze period they talk about at the very end.
Right.
You know, the Ice Age is always cold, but it sort of bounces up and down.
Right.
But I've heard people say, geologists say, that at the end there's this period of very consistent, very cold temperatures that they call the deep freeze. And I think they say that ends at around 20,022. But I could be wrong on this. I'm really more of a domestication person.
Okay. So, all right. So if those footprints, at least like 18,000. So, but we don't see domestication, like large-scale domestication at all through any of that evidence, correct?
No, all the early domestication events actually track on pretty precisely to the end of the glacial.
Okay. And what were we domesticating at that time?
Depending on which you believe, probably the earliest domesticate is either rice in South China, or maybe wheat barley in, the Fertile Crescent kind of area.
Right.
And the rice evidence really depends on what they call microfossils, which is starch grains, phytoliths, things like that.
Right.
So, and those, it's harder to determine domestication based on these microfossils than by the actual grain of rice, which is right there in front of you and you can look at it. So, I think they're saying maybe 15,000 for the rice, maybe 12,000 for the wheat barley years ago, which tracks on to the end of the last glacial and maybe right before or right during that Younger Dryas period.
Wow.
After. So it's the glacial, and then it warms up real warm and toasty.
Right, and the flowers, right? They're that's what they call it, the driest period because of the flowers, and then they're frozen or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. But there's that Bowling Allerode period where it's warm and toasty and lovely, and then it gets chilly again, and that's the Younger Dryas.
Right.
And then it warms up again.
Right, okay. Wow. That's a long, okay, so, and that kind of coincides with, I don't know, have you been seeing any of the stuff on the copper culture that they've found in, what would it be, the Midwest area?
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about? So what, do you know anything about that?
Well, I mean, part of it is they named it a long time ago, so it's the old copper culture.
Right.
I think there may be more than one to make everyone's lives more complex.
Okay.
But there is that huge float copper source up in, sort of Minnesota, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, just huge, amazing hunks of raw copper that just hang out there.
Yeah.
So unlike everywhere else in the world, you can get, in this part of the world, like around the Midwest, you can get copper technology before you get smelting technology.
Oh, yeah,
because it's just there, right?
It's
you
not
just,
the ore.
You just break it off with a stone tool and you have a hunk of copper, and then you can process it, manipulate it, shape it however you like.
Wow. That's so wild. Does that blow you? Okay, so when you were 17, was any of that in the literature at that time? Like, were people aware of that?
Yeah, the old copper culture's been known a long time. Because I went to undergraduate in Wisconsin, we're kind of right there with a lot of it.
Right. Okay. So, I know you don't think that Cahokia collapsed, but I do want to talk about collapse, because collapse is a big topic right now when it comes to technology with, I've talked to some pretty wild people. There's a company out of Switzerland that's taking neurons and using them as storage stuff for data, like hard drives, essentially. And it's like 1,000,000 times more efficient, like with energy usage. It's like 5 car lifetimes in just that. So, and then you have like Colossal Biosciences doing the genetic stuff going on, and then you have AI. There's a lot of people concerned about a lot of the science going on right now, but you are somebody that taught me collapse. So I guess it's just better to ask it this up front. Do you think that we're on the verge of like not just in America, but there is this general vibe of, world culture? And it got me thinking of the Bronze Age collapse, because we did that whole system up on the board.
Yeah.
And it was so wide and far and complicated. So do you think that we're on like a larger scale of that? Should people be worried, or does this just seem like we're in one of those periods of an up and down in a society?
Oh, I'm always an optimist in these things.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things we learned from collapse is that pretty much every society ever has always thought they were collapsing.
Right.
So if we look back to ancient Rome, yes, Rome collapsed, but in the reign of Augustus, which is traditionally at the beginning of the Roman, period of great power,
Right.
Augustus is legislating that people have more children because he's really worried that they're all going to collapse. And in China, we see Confucius similarly complaining that they're probably on the verge of collapse, in part because of their adoption of this new musical type with the 7-stone or the 7-note scale, unlike the traditional proper type of 5-note scale, which had been done up until that time.
Okay.
So it's not so unusual for societies to be worrying about their collapse.
Right.
It's not to say it never happens.
Right.
I mean, Rome did end, as we talked about, and there is, every once in a while you get one of these crazy things like the late Bronze Age collapse.
Okay.
So I'm not saying there couldn't be a broad systemic collapse, because at least one has occurred.
Right.
But in general, I'm inclined to think that usually it's people just stressing out because times are changing.
Yeah. Okay. So would you say that a lot of times what we may mistake for fears of collapse are just change in the system itself, and as long as we can adapt to one of those changes and not lose our cool, we won't start falling apart entirely?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even go that far. I mean, consider what happened when industrialization came in. People totally lost their cool.
Right. Right.
And yet there was no collapse. But that didn't make it easy to be a person who, for example, had been taken off their farm and was working in a factory 15 hours a day.
Right.
So rapid change always causes massive societal upheaval. That's sort of what it does.
Yeah. It's that living on like the edge of what could be and what can't be, you know? So, and there's always a lot of fear in that change, but okay, so, but we know Rome did eventually collapse, but that's also controversial. Did it collapse early, late, middle of the road, and I oftentimes wonder, is collapse the wrong word? Would it be more of like change is too simple though, like a morph, like it's morphing into something different,
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of what I would say sort of the more avant-garde writers these days would say, that it's not a collapse, but it's a change into maybe a simpler society that was possibly better for the people who lived on the ground at the time. And, as you know, that's one of the big arguments about Rome. Did it collapse because at the end of the day, at the very end, it was better to not be in Rome for this regular old Joe Roman citizen?
Right. Well, okay, so, and then with collapse, though, you get a lot of obvious ones with it. So, like, we know Greece went through a dark ages, but now we're rethinking the Middle Age, Dark Age, that it wasn't actually a Dark Ages. So, why did we believe the fall of Rome led to a Dark Age to begin with? And why are people kind of retracting on that now?
Well, I mean, it really depends on how you define civilization, is what it gets down to.
Right.
Which is kind of like a big thing.
Right.
And so you can make a really solid argument that there was a dark age after the collapse of Rome, based on things like loss of literacy, loss of hygiene, overall decrease in diet, things of that nature.
Right.
So if you're defining civilization through writing and baths,
Right.
it was a collapse.
Okay.
But if you're defining civilization through maybe different methods, you could argue that being a peasant towards the end of the Roman period was not that great.
Right.
The whole Baz thing had kind of only gone into the cities.
Right.
And so people in the countryside, you could say, well, their lives were getting worse and worse. Taxes were high. By the end of the late antiquity, late Rome period, people are pretty much born into their jobs. So it's like proto-feudalism, proto-serfs.
Yeah.
And so you could kind of imagine a world where, if you got a choice, you might just wander over to the Goths,
Right. Migration was a lot more of a thing. It seems like, you could just pick up, if you're already losing everything, you can just, well, guys, we're moving. We're going to go west or east and figure out a way to survive it. Now, what's the biggest thing, though, that you've learned from, because do you still teach collapse?
Yeah,
right
yeah.
now? Okay.
Well, not right now, but I'm doing it next semester.
Okay. Because we also did origins, too, which was fascinating as well. You taught also how civilizations can arise. When you look at it, though, which one do you find more interesting? How cultures form or how they fall apart?
Oh, yeah. I much prefer forming.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, that's always been my primary interest.
Okay.
The collapse is sort of there for consistency and because people are interested.
Okay, so it kind of helps us delineate what period maybe we're in of time and culture.
Yeah, maybe, or,
Okay.
It's just... you probably shouldn't do the origins of cultures without, or the rise of complex cultures without talking about how they become simpler.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I know we're going to kind of come up here on our last 10 minutes here, but I wanted to kind of ask you a couple. You can answer them yes or no, or you can go as deep as you want. But they were just like 5 or 6 little questions that I had for you that I would actually love to know. What's your exact opinion? So, number one, this one wouldn't be yes or no, but what do you think the biggest misconception when it comes to archaeology is? What if you could program something into any layperson's mind about what they normally would think archaeology is like and what it actually is, what would that be?
Probably archaeology is humans and there are no dinosaurs.
There we go. Okay.
Like, that's the baseline.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Does it happen a lot?
Yeah.
People, okay. What, calling you like a paleontologist instead, or using archaeologists to do dinosaur bones?
Yeah, it's all the past, right? And it's all
Right.
digging, so it's
Right.
easy to understand why people would confuse them.
Right.
But yeah, like if you're asking for the most baseline thing, it
Yeah.
would be we do people.
We do people, not animals.
Yeah.
Okay.
It-
Cool.
Or if we do animals, they're associated with people, right? Like dogs
Right.
or cows or whatever.
Right. Okay. Well, what is some exciting research that you're working on that maybe we'll get to have another conversation on here in the future? And then I would love for you to kind of just tell people a little bit about your book, which is that Archaeologist Field Guide to Pot Residues. So is that a collegiate thing, or is that brought down to a normal person's digestible material, or?
That's really written for other archaeologists,
Okay,
actually.
cool.
So it's, in terms of the chemistry,
Yeah.
it's written for someone who knows no chemistry, but it is written for someone who knows something about archaeology.
Okay. Cool.
So it's explicitly for archaeologists who might want to know about pottery residues. When
Yeah.
could they use it? When couldn't they? What questions can they answer? That kind of thing. So it's
Awesome.
pretty specialized, but
Cool.
hopefully not too technical.
For sure. And then, but what is your favorite civilization, like, origin? Like,
Oh, probably the Mississippians at Cahokia.
You think so?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I started digging. Not back as a high school student, but once I was in graduate school, that's where I always dug. And it's such a exciting historical period there.
Yeah.
You can kind of see in my view, you can kind of see the competing chiefdoms,
okay.
like, compete back and forth, not necessarily through violence, but maybe through ritual or through gift giving or whatever. And then, and this sort of rapid explosion of creativity invent a new urban society, kind of out of what they had before. I just think that's pretty interesting.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's
And then it spreads outwards.
Right. Of course. So what would be your second, too? So that's for in America. So what
Yeah.
about, like, over in the old world? We don't normally like to call that anymore, the old world, but,
Yeah. Yeah. I do kind of like the Indus when you get right down to it. Largely just, there is writing, but no one can read it, so that's kind of fun.
Okay.
And it's just fairly recent, you know. It wasn't really found until the 1920s.
Right, right.
Excavation was relatively sparse until recently, and yet there's still really amazing work being done recently by our colleagues in India and Pakistan.
That's right.
So it's got this combination of being not well known, and yet data is coming out on a really regular basis, so we're learning a lot.
Okay.
And who knows, maybe someday someone will translate the writing, and that'll be like really exciting.
Yeah. So that was going to be my next question. Do you think that that is actually writing? I was listening to a couple of anthropologists. One of them was a linguist. And he was saying, well, it could just be symbols. They could just be this or that, or it could just be the bathroom sign. And I, and I know that that's silly, but I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's actually writing?
I think it's writing.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason being that you see kind of repeated forms from that early Ravi phase, which is like early on when you don't see much writing on the seals or whatever.
Okay.
And then as you get into sort of the mature or integration era, or whatever you want to call it, you see the same repeated symbols on the seals, sometimes with the animals and sometimes without. You see them on the, those copper plates from Mohenjo-Daro.
Right.
And then there's that sign from Dolavira, the road sign, which is, pretty evocative in many ways. So that, I really do think it is writing, but I do think the length of the inscriptions is pretty limiting.
Okay.
In terms of translating a text with no known descendant language.
Right.
So we have to guess, we're obviously, if it is writing, we're missing something huge. So presumably most of the texts were on something that didn't preserve.
Okay.
Like paper or wood or, something like Egyptian papyrus, only without the great Egyptian preservation that you get in the desert that permits the preservation of all the papyrus records.
Right. And it would be useful to have some form of at least a Rosetta Stone of some kind, at least something to match it up with.
Like that,
Okay. Well, okay. We might have to go a little bit longer here. So, okay, we talked about in class one time that there was some indication of, we know the Indus traded with Sumer, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so was that, I can't remember what the evidence of that was though. Was that like the little symbols and everything, like Indus writing, or was that actual artifacts?
It's actual artifacts.
Okay,
yeah.
I couldn't remember.
So the Indus is setting right on the source of a lot of carnelian, and it's also got that Short Chagai site right next to one of the big lapis lazuli mines.
Right.
So, and specifically Indus has these wild etched carnelian beads, which require a great degree of expertise and craft specialization. And as best we know, Indus is the only people who know how to make them in this period, and they show up on Queen Puabi's tomb in the early dynastic period.
There's obvious contact.
And there are cylinder seals in Indus as well, although they seem to be Indus motifs, but it's clear that they saw cylinder seals.
Okay.
And they apparently didn't like them much because they stuck with their own, happy little stamp seals.
Right.
But they made a few. I just taught that unit like last week. So I think there were 3 cylinder seals from Mohenjo-Daro, 1 from Kalibangan, and they're around, just not many.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's pretty clearly direct contact.
Okay.
And there's also some cool inscriptions and writings from Mesopotamia, in which they appear to be talking about people from the Indus, or Meluha, as they called it at the time.
Okay. What is it? Real briefly, condense it. What are they saying?
Mostly, like, there's a town of these people from the Indus over there, or there's this one guy who was acting as a translator and he got sued for something. You know how the Mesopotamian inscriptions are.
Right.
They tended to focus on taxes and lawsuits.
Right.
So that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're clearly around. And at one point they talk about dogs of Meluha.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which implies that there's a specific dog breed from Indus, which is interesting because there are dog figurines coming out of Indus too.
Are there any bones?
Of dogs, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
Maybe?
Okay.
I mean, there's definite evidence in terms of footprints, I know. So probably, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, cool. Okay, so for those, this is a great question. What is a bulla?
Okay, so a bulla is this thing, I mean, yes, it's a Greek term that comes from actually a little amulet that they used to wear in classical era. But in terms of Mesopotamia, it's a little clay envelope that was used to contain tokens and was used as kind of an envoicing system during what they call the Ubaid period, which dates from like maybe 4000 BCE to like maybe 3300 BCE. And it was developed kind of in mostly Sumer, and seems to have been the basis for Mesopotamian cuneiform. So you can see a really nice transition from the bulla with different kinds of tokens in there and the cylinder seals, and then they start impressing the tokens on the outside.
Right.
Then they start scratching little pictures in place of the complex tokens.
Yeah.
And then, they flatten them up and you've got little tablets. And so slowly and slowly through time, you can kind of see people shifting over to the cuneiform, which takes a while.
Right, right.
But yeah, they seem to be this kind of envoicing system that eventually gives rise to cuneiform down the line.
Okay, you got to pick one or the other. Which one do you prefer, Babylon or Egypt?
Are we talking like Hammurabi Babylon?
I'm talking like high period. You can pick and choose which high period and of either. Which one? Well, okay. If you had to live in Babylon, what period would you want to live in? And then if you had to live in Egypt, when would you want to live?
Yeah, if I had to live in Babylon, probably really early on in Hammurabi, because the Neo-Assyrians were real jerks.
Yeah, right.
So I wouldn't want to be living with them any. You never know when they might lose their temper and, kill off 80% of your city.
Right.
So yeah, early with Hammurabi.
Okay, so 1800 BC,
Something
right?
like
okay,
that,
cool.
yeah.
Okay, and then what about Egypt?
Definitely Egypt. I would think I would probably live in Egypt in almost any period.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, being a woman, assuming I'm not having a gender swap as I go back in time, women had more rights in Egypt. There's a possibility of divorce. They could own property.
Right.
The literature was slightly more cheerful, thinking of some of the Middle Kingdom official, lamentations.
Okay.
But on average,
Okay.
I would say. Yeah.
Not Akhenaten time period, though. Maybe avoid that one.
Maybe avoid that. That's short. That's 25 years?
Yeah,
maybe?
something along the lines of that. Okay. Okay. And, speaking of Egypt then, all right, what do you think of the new Museum of Cairo?
Oh, it sounds amazing, but I haven't even done the fly through, or I haven't done any virtual visit or anything. Is
Did
it
you
good?
watch the celebration that they
No.
did for it? Just let alone, it was like a rock concert with the pyramids and everything. They were wheeling in, and I got to go to the Biltmore
really?
with the
Wow.
King Tut thing. And I got to look at that when my
That's
sister
great.
was getting married there. And what was really cool was some of the things we talked about, because we did discuss Tutankhamun a little bit. That would have been in Origins, the Origin of Civilization class.
in the 308.
Yeah, and it was just really neat to kind of, I brought my notebook, my from class and everything. I was like, okay, so we did talk about this and we talked about that. So to the second to last question, which is with Tutankhamun, what do you think happened? Do you think that he was, his mom, then there was his father, and there was a lot of, do you think he died of natural causes, or do you think that he was murdered?
I think it was natural causes, because if you look at the more recent DNA analysis, he is not a healthy person.
No.
There's the malaria, there's the cleft palate, there's the clubfoot, but actually someone did some, I don't know the year on it, but someone did some pretty interesting things with the DNA, in which it looks like he had some sort of a disease that prevented blood flow to his bones, which is why he had all these problems with the cleft palate and the clubfoot and so on. It wasn't just, I'm sure there was inbreeding is a big factor, but this disease prevented blood getting to his bones, which would have meant that they were fragile, right? So he would have had this twisted leg. The swallowing would have been hard. He had malaria on top of all that. And at some point, obviously, he broke his leg, but it wouldn't have healed very well on account of this disease, wouldn't have been letting blood get to the bone to do its healing business.
Right.
So yeah, personally, I think he was health-wise it's kind of amazing he lived to 18.
Yeah. He, I couldn't even imagine, because they thought Pharaoh was God, right?
Yeah.
So how do you,
Well, remember, the depiction is the reality.
Right.
So if you look at the King Tut artifacts and you see the depictions of him, he isn't, I'm sure you've seen the realistic reconstructions.
Yeah.
And, he's not that great looking.
No, he is falling apart a little bit.
But if you look at his depictions in the tomb, doesn't he look adorable?
He looks wonderful.
So young and healthy and walking well, hunting, sitting with his wife.
Good time to probably mention this. What is the biggest thing about Egypt when it comes to when we read their writings? Just for the audience to know, what should we be aware of when anything Egypt?
Yeah, so with Egypt, particularly with the hieroglyphics, it was magic, and everything you wrote in hieroglyphics was true.
Right.
So if you, for example, depicted Tutankhamun as a healthy, hearty, adorable young man, he actually was.
Right.
The reality, the physical reality, was not the real reality, right?
Right. Exactly. Okay. Well, last question. Are you working on anything big that we should keep our eyes open for?
Well, I'm planning my next field season, which I hope will be at Brunswick Town Fort Anderson State Historic Site. So I'm planning an archaeological field school for 2026. So if anyone's gonna, be in the Brunswick Town vicinity in May to June, with any luck, maybe my students and I will be down there. Well, that would be nice.
It would be really cool to come and say hello and
Yeah.
actually see some really cool research being done. So, Dr. Reber, thank you so much. And
My pleasure.
anytime you want to come back on, you just let me know.
Okay.
We'll do an email train, and I'm sure I'll have a billion more questions after just talking here. I'll be like, oh, I should have asked this or asked that. So, thank you so much for coming on again. And guys, if you haven't heard of her, check her out. And if you are archaeologist adjacent, go check out that book, because you won't believe it, because you don't get to take a class with her, but the experience of learning from Dr. Reber is an experience like none other. So, Dr. Reber, thank you so much again. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you next week.